today's gospel, Jesus is teaching us one of the important ways in which the old covenant will reframe the new covenant. You see, in the Old Covenant, the book of Leviticus, chapter 19, verse 2, it says, "Be holy as God in heaven is holy." Jesus starts today's gospel by quoting that passage, except instead of saying be holy, he says be merciful as your Father in heaven is merciful. In other words, what he's saying here is not that holiness doesn't count anymore. Instead, what he's saying is that under the new covenant, one of the measures of holiness will be the mercy that you show to other people. And we are obligated to show other people that mercy because God has first poured out that mercy upon each and every one of us. The second part of today's gospel, I've often heard people misquoting and suggesting that it's Jesus talking about giving money to the church. And they would often say, look, if you give lots of money to the church, then God will give you lots of money back. And here's Jesus in the gospel saying that very thing. In actual fact, that's not actually true. What Jesus is talking about here is the measure of mercy and generosity and compassion that we pour out upon others. If we are generous in our mercy and our compassion towards others, then God will return that to us many times over. He also talks about this being poured out into our laps, and to our modern sensibilities, this might seem a little bit strange. But in the time of Christ, what would happen is people would go to the market and they would fold their tunic or their cloak over in their belt, and it would form a little lap bag, basically, and they would go to the market and they would buy things like grain and wheat and other things, and a measure would be poured into that lap bag that they would carry. And the way you knew that you were not being ripped off and that you were being honestly and fairly treated and that you were getting a good measure was if that grain or barley or whatever it was you were purchasing was overflowing out of that lap bag. And Jesus is using that example to highlight the generosity and mercy of God to us. If we show mercy and compassion to others, then that same mercy and compassion will be returned to us on a magnitude that we can't even comprehend. It will be returned to us many, many times over, because that's how great God's love is for each and every one of us. Today's saint quote of the day comes from Saint Ignatius of Loyola, and he says this: "Teach us to give and not count the cost." Surely that would be the perfect prayer to pray today after reflecting on this gospel passage and this call to show mercy and compassion to the world around us. You see, even under the best of circumstances, it's still difficult to show mercy and compassion. But to show that mercy and compassion without counting the cost, without expecting anything at all in return, that takes a special grace from God. And so we need to be praying for that grace to be present in our lives in order that we can be more faithful to this call of Jesus in today's gospel. The wonderful thing about our God is that he is not some distant, segregated being who just shouts out divine orders at us. He leads by example. Christ comes to earth and suffers heinously on the cross out of mercy and compassion for each and every one of us. And we are now called to show some small measure of that same mercy and compassion to the world around us. But to do that, we need the grace of God. And so we need to be praying for that. And we need to pray to be able to give without counting the cost.